Hello there, welcome back to Backyard Ballistics. Today's project is certainly less desperate than the last one, but the gun is quite older. Marked 1915, this gun was around for almost all of World War I, and now it definitely deserves some care. Unless you're quite into old firearms, chances are you won't immediately recognize this one, and I'll tell you why later. It is a Mannlicher M95 and was the main rifle of the Austro-Hungarian Empire throughout World War I. So it doesn't surprise it ended up in Italy, considering the northern region of the country saw massive fighting against Austria. This gun was probably captured or brought home as a war trophy. What is a bit more surprising is that it finally got thrown away and ended up in a scrap pile. You see, it's true that back in the day there were literally millions of them, but the vast majority of those that survived World War I were modified and rechambered in the 1930s, and for this reason not many of the originals are still around. Another thing that makes this specimen worth saving is that it comes with a matching serial number stock and an original sling. A complete bayonet set was also found together with the gun, and it clearly shared the same decay environment, but that deserves a separate discussion later on. Anyway, let's try to take this thing apart, evaluate the damage, and then decide our strategy. There he is. I got lucky for once. Look at that. How about that one? That's extremely lucky. Ooh. On the main parts, there are still areas where the original finish is in pristine condition, so I ruled out chemical derusting since that would also dissolve the old finish. What I'll do is I'll boil those parts in water for about 40 minutes, and then I'm going to mechanically cut off the rust using steel wool and soft brushes. There he is. Also, I've found that keeping the surface wet with water while carding makes the process surprisingly easier, and I honestly have no idea why. Anyway, this has two advantages. The first is that it allows to remove rust without losing the old finish. To an extent, it even somewhat restores a finish in the areas that got rusted. But secondly, it won't remove those hard lumps of oxide that formed inside the pits, and that's not always a bad thing. See, the surface of the metal here is no longer smooth and is instead peppered with tiny corrosion pits. The reason you're not seeing them is because they are packed with hard corrosion products. So hard that they'll never get out of there on their own, and the resulting surface will look much smoother than if I removed them. This way of dealing with rust is the simplest form of pitting mitigation, a topic I'll cover more in future videos. While the barreled action was brewing, I took the bolt apart, which is without a doubt the most distinctive feature of this gun. It is a straight pull design, meaning that to operate the bolt, no rotation or other unlocking action is required. All the operator needs to do is pull the bolt back and then push it shut again to chamber a new round, which is a concept that sounded great on paper, but it kind of under-delivered in practice, and I'll show you why in a bit. The bolt was originally not blued, so I'll derust it chemically without any worries. I'm also doing the same thing to the other small parts where rust has gone too far, so those will have first to be brought back to naked steel and then reblued. Here I'm using 5% citric acid in the ultrasonic cleaner. Going back to the barreled action and the magazine, after removing all the rust we wanted to take off, there are some patches that are too light in color and I want to do something about it. I will apply a coat of rust bluing on those areas. Rust bluing is indeed well suited for making small repairs to an already blued object, and in fact is the way this rifle would have been blued back in 1915 when it was manufactured. We'll find proof of that by noticing that the inner surfaces of the action are not blued, and that's typical of rust bluing. Since the chemicals are applied by swabbing rather than dipping, you only blacken the areas that are swabbed, and very often the insides were not treated. You see that in older Lugers a lot, and practically no firearm made after the 30s. 72 hours later, a uniform coat of rust has formed on the areas that I've treated, and a final boil in water will convert that into the black finish we want. By adding more coats, I could get the metal as dark as the healthy finish, but I don't want a World War I rifle to look like it was made yesterday. For the smaller bits, I instead used the usual caustic bluing. So we're done with the metal, let's give the bayonet a closer look, because something's not right with it. First of all, it's stuck in this position. Do you see anything wrong? That's the edge. That's the spine. That's the edge, and that's the spine. Somebody must have inserted it upside down and was apparently convinced that was the right way of doing it because he jammed the blade in there pretty tight. Also, whoever picked it up must have gotten confused among the different models of bayonets used by Austrians, because this is the bayonet for a different rifle, the older M88/90, and won't fit the M95. This is still compatible with the origin of the rifle as a war trophy, since lots of older rifle models were still used by the Austrian army in World War I because of the insufficient supply of the newer model, and one of the main fighting fronts of Austria was right in today's northern Italy against Italian troops. About that, I've got quite a personal story to tell, as my great-great-grandfather died fighting there and was even awarded a gold medal, the highest decoration an Italian soldier can get. However, at this point I realized that was all I knew about him, so I started looking online and stumbled across a website called MyHeritage that specializes in family history research, and not only it helped greatly in reconstructing my family history, but they were also kind enough to sponsor this video. On their website, which you can try out for free at this link, I built up my family tree from scratch, adding bits of information that I gathered and all pictures I found around the house, and this is what I came up with. Here is Giovanni Antonio Ambrosio, my gold medal awarded great-great-grandfather that died fighting in World War I, and this is the path that leads to me. As soon as I entered his name in the family tree, the website recognized him and linked me to an array of different online sources providing information about him. A colonel of the Italian army, he died while leading his men to victory near the town of Asiago on the 28th of January of 1918. Preserving history is important, and family history is no different. The main power of MyHeritage lies in the ability of expanding family trees. When the algorithm finds a match between branches of two different family trees, it notifies the users and the trees can be joined. And this can go on forever, helping discover distant or forgotten relatives and preserving your family history for generations to come. MyHeritage also gives you access to over 19 billion historical records, and among those was a copy of my ancestor's birth record that allowed reconstructing his descendants for an additional 2 generations. They also offer picture improvement tools that proved quite useful in restoring and colorizing these old, tiny photos of my ancestor as he was deployed in Africa in 1896. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at the link below and enjoy all the features MyHeritage has to offer. If you then decide to continue your subscription, you'll get a 50% discount. Irony of fate, the rifle I'm working on is exactly the one that was shooting at my great-great-grandfather. Anyway, time to look at the stock, which is quite interesting actually. We've already seen it matches the serial number of the gun, so they were born together, which is valuable, but there's something else that is very unusual for a gun stock, and that is the type of wood that was employed. The wood species most common for gun stocks are typically those featuring, on top of adequate mechanical properties, small, uniformly distributed pores like walnut, maple, birch, beech, just to name the most common ones. But this stock is instead something completely different. Look how the pores are large and concentrated on the growth ring. This is elm wood and is quite an uncommon choice for a rifle stock, with the exception of Mannlichers. As in practically any rifle, walnut was the first choice of wood, but that had the infamous drawback of running out as soon as a war broke out, so each country had to figure out a substitute, often one of the ones I mentioned before. Austria-Hungary, however, used
pretty much anything they had, which means you can find these stocks also made out of oak, chestnut, elm, and other ring-porous woods that are not usually associated with rifle stocks. There was such a variety of woods being used that stocks were stamped with different letters depending on what they were made out of. In my case, the letter is an R, standing for Rooster, elm in German.
Featuring an evolutionary marvel known as interlocked grain, elm wood is exceptionally resistant to splitting. Ask a woodsman if you don't believe me, they hate elm. Anyway, the stock has a lot of small dents and scratches, which are totally compatible with the gun used throughout its history, so I think they should be preserved. For that reason, I'll try not to take any wood off, but only clean it and work on the finish. This unfortunately means that we won't be able to fully enjoy the beautiful elm grain. I'm using a sponge to rub a little bit of soapy citric acid solution to get rid of the dirt. Then I'm doing the same with plain water to rinse off any leftovers. The sponge should be just slightly wet, we want as little water as possible going into the wood. After this, I let the stock dry, and then it was time to reapply some finish. Some of the original one is still there, and it looks like some reactive hard curing finish. A polymerized oil, like true oil, should look practically the same. The last thing I have to take care of is the leather. Both rifle sling and the bayonet frog are made of leather, so I'm treating them together, even though, as I said, the bayonet is for a different gun. They're so stiff that it feels like they're made out of cardboard. First of all, it's time for a well overdue clean with saddle soap. After a lot of scrubbing, rinsing and drying, the leather is already looking much better and is back to its original colour. However, it's still quite stiff, and for that I'm applying some leather balsam.
Okay, the final question is, will it work? The first thing to look out for in this regard are the conditions of the pressure-bearing parts, namely the barrel and the bolt.
After giving the bore a good brush, it doesn't look too bad and it certainly is safe to use. It also retained most of its rifling, so I'm not expecting too bad of a performance out of these. The bolt head shows no damage either, and I'm definitely going to try it out.
With what ammo, however, I really have no clue. Remember when I said that practically all of the surviving examples of these rifles were modified in the 1930s? The main change was the caliber. They were all rechambered to a different one, the 8x56R Hungarian.
The original ammo was instead the 1893 Scharfe Patrone, nowadays simply known as the 8x50mm R, a 19th century rimmed first generation smokeless powder cartridge featuring a jacketed, exceptionally heavy round-nose bullet. What you're seeing here are original World War I era clips dated 1917.
This cartridge configuration was already obsolete by the end of World War I, and the need for something more modern was felt. But the state of the economy and the restrictions imposed to Austria regarding the production of new military weapons forced them to modify already existing M95 rifles instead of making new ones. The vast majority was therefore rechambered in the 8x56 Hungarian cartridge, with the old 8x50 being quickly forgotten. Soon after, in 1938, Austria was annexed into the Third Reich, and their equipment was uniform to the German one, with infantry being armed with Mauser rifles, employing the much more technologically modern 8x57 cartridge. That's why at the beginning I said the Mannlichers are often forgotten about. It's a gun design that didn't survive World War I, their production ending with the war, with the ones still in stock being essentially considered second choice equipment. The cartridge was even more forgotten about, because all the Mannlichers still in military stock after World War I were rechambered to use a different cartridge.
Long story short, no one has been making that round commercially for at least 50 years now, simply because there's no demand for it. And the same applies to reloading components and equipment, so getting this gun to fire was going to be a big hassle. I had to trim and fireform the brass because you can't get it, and I had to do the sizing without the proper dies because you can't get those either. Then I had to load them with a powder charge I had to guess because there's practically no official load data for powders available in Europe, and I had to use a much shorter and lighter bullet than what was originally used because nobody makes a 240 grain 8mm bullet anymore. This meant a shorter cartridge overall length than what the gun was designed for, and I really hope it won't cause too many jams. The action is what stood out the most compared to most other military repeating rifles. Instead of the ubiquitous turn bolt design, Mannlicher's rifle used a straight pull bolt. The idea was that, not being necessary to turn the bolt before and after the reciprocating motion, the weapon would be quicker to reload. This sounds more an advantage than it really is. Firstly, even if the bolt is straight pull, you still have to lift your hand from the grip to reach the handle, so you might as well use that upward movement to turn the bolt. Also, in a turn bolt design, while you're turning it, the handle acts as leverage, providing mechanical advantage useful both to overcome primer extraction and to compress the firing pin spring. In the Mannlicher straight pull design, the bolt head turning is actuated through a helical cam coupling, which is packed with friction, meaning that opening the bolt after a shot requires a lot of backwards force to be applied on the bolt handle, otherwise the bolt just remains stuck. That's why you often see people, including myself, slamming the bolt handle to be sure it opens. So you still have to do the upward and downward hand movement as in a turn bolt, but your rearward stroke is now much harder to start.
At the end of the day, the reload time is not reduced substantially, and the Mannlicher straight pull bolt ended up being abandoned.
Other than the straight pull bolt, another invention by Ferdinand von Mannlicher characterizes this rifle, and that is the magazine, which is loaded by means of a 5-round end-block clip. Notice how this is practically the same fitting system used by Carcano rifles, and again, irony of fate, they ended up shooting at each other. The main issues encountered in firing the rifle were due to the untested load and the Frankenstein brass. The test actually went fairly smooth, smoother in fact than the straight pull action, which you see I'm often struggling to open, but the not too standard brass was letting a little bit of gas to blow back out of the action straight into my face, which was not exactly pleasant, but again it's not the rifle's fault. I'm sure the gun can do much better with proper ammunition and when shooting from a rest. Now, after this final exercise, this historical weapon can finally find its resting place in a museum, where it will be stored as it is, fully functional, as it should be, with no silly deactivation. Once again, a huge thanks goes to my patrons, which as usual are all listed here. Thank you all for watching, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye.